right, welcome into Surviving Paradise, the podcast that takes a sometimes serious, oftentimes humorous look at the claim by Jehovah's Witness leadership that they're living in a modern-day spiritual paradise hosted by them. I'm your host here, Stacy Bauman, former elder, ministerial servant, and a kid raised as a Jehovah's Witness in the 70s and 80s. As we do, we like to have fun here, but we like to heal too. Sarcasm, humor, never meant to offend. Welcome in this week. For those that might be here that are new to Jehovah's Witnesses, I feel compelled to share that they used to preach. I know. For those of us that have been around a while, that's not a big shock. But these days, it's a little more far and few between. A Jehovah's Witness listening will claim that they still do preach. However, I have to be honest, I completely disagree. The emphasis on door-to-door preaching, field service, and pioneering formed the foundation of all things Jehovah's Witnesses during my tenure, from the 70s through most of the 2000s. It was the first and foremost messaging in all things Jehovah's Witnesses, field service, pioneering, get your hours in, and so forth. The leadership of Jehovah's Witnesses held preaching up as the single greatest identifying factor that they are the one and only true religion. They pointed at it every single week. The other being that they alone recognize Jehovah God's name, that it's Jehovah, and it isn't and never was, but that's a subject for another day, and a very interesting subject, I might add, maybe in the future. But the governing body has long pointed to preaching as the single greatest identifier that Jesus Christ of the Bible chose them alone to save all of mankind during the last days that apparently never end. Frankly stated, Jehovah's Witnesses are elite. Have you ever thought about it? They're truly elite, the one and only. They consistently issue reminders that their organization exists as the sole conduit to saving your life and anyone else's. Here is a really small sampling of a few examples. From the Watchtower of 1994, June 1st, page 18, we are told, quote, "An important way in which we show love for our fellow man is by witnessing to them about God's kingdom. Only one group of people is doing this work that Jesus foretold. These are Jehovah's Witnesses." End quote. How about another? From the Does God Care brochure 2001, page 30, quote, "Do you know of anyone else who preaches about God's kingdom from house to house throughout the world?" End quote. And no mention of preaching is complete without a mention of arguably the first doomsday preacher of all time, my favorite guy, Noah. From the Watchtower of 2000, January 15th, page 9, we get, quote, "Before he brought the great deluge, though, Jehovah gave people an opportunity to repent. He commissioned Noah to preach, and Noah obeyed, serving as a preacher of righteousness, perhaps for 40 or 50 years or more." End quote. Quick note here, as I do, this is completely false. I encourage anyone and everyone, particularly a Jehovah's Witness, to study this. It and Noah are not mentioned anywhere in the Bible as being a preacher. And if you would like a fun side project that doesn't involve preaching while trapping 2 lions for your boat, dive into how these guys try to peg Noah as a preacher. It's not mentioned anywhere in the Genesis account. The reference in 2 Peter 2:5 is not to door-to-door preaching. And also how they mistranslated Matthew 24:39 to make it seem that Noah had apparently so much time on his hands he could pioneer while he was building the world's first floating zoo. I'm serious. Have fun with this. and prepare to have your perception of my favorite 500-year-old virgin completely shattered. Along with all those stupid public talk outlines, the dramas, and more, Noah did not preach. There is no mention of it. Where they got the 40 or 50 year figure is fascinating. All fabricated. And also, as a side note, I don't think Noah ever really existed, but I'll let you be the judge of that. Never mind that none of these bold claims about preaching are even true. For example, be on the lookout for a couple of young guys wearing white shirts, black ties, riding bikes, and asking if you want the Book of Mormon. Despite their claims, other people do preach or evangelize their particular faith. Ignore it when they knock on your door. Only Jehovah's Witnesses are allowed to do that, according to the governing body. But to further emphasize how important the preaching work is to all things JW, I simply have to share this. Are you ready for one of my new favorite Watchtower references of all time? See if you pick up on anything. It comes from way, way, way back. It's got to be Old Light. Way back in, oh wait, never mind. It's only in 2016. From the May 2016 Watchtower, pages 8 through 12, the article, Go and Make Disciples of People of All the Nations, the governing body, a faithful slave, told Jehovah's Witnesses this, quote, many religious groups feel that they are preaching the gospel or good news. However, their efforts are often limited to personal testimonies, church services, or programs broadcast through the media, whether by means of television or on the internet. Others point to their charitable activities or their endeavors in the fields of medicine and education. How do these claims measure up when compared with what Jesus commanded his disciples to do? End quote. I must ask at this point, do you know, can you think of anyone that does this, where their efforts are personal testimonies, video, the internet, and television? Do you know anybody? Anybody come to mind? They literally just described themselves. And this is only 8 years old. Self-awareness doesn't exist in God's organization. Holy Spirit's there, but self-awareness, it's lacking. But the same May 2016 Watchtower continues with some reasoning that sets these guys apart. And I must say it's not in a good way. Check out how they teach Jehovah's Witnesses to think, how they develop their cognitive skills, reasoning, critical thinking, and keep in mind that this is all said to be under Jesus Christ's direction, right? Here it comes. The May 2016 Watchtower continues, quote, were Jesus' disciples to be passive, waiting for people to come up to them? Definitely not. After his resurrection, Jesus addressed hundreds of his disciples and told them, go therefore and make disciples of people of all the nations, baptizing them, teaching them to observe all things I have commanded you. 4 actions are therefore required. We must make disciples, baptize them, and teach them. But what is the first thing we need to do? Jesus said, go. With regard to this command, one Bible scholar commented, to go is the task of each believer, whether across the street or across the ocean. End quote. I wonder which Bible scholar said that. We're not told. Isn't that interesting? But his name might be similar to, I don't know, David Splain or Jeffrey Winder. I don't know. I'm sure it's a scholar that lives and exists on the governing body, right? But the article continues. Did you pick up on a few things? Quote, was Jesus referring only to the individual efforts of his followers? Or was he alluding to an organized campaign to preach the good news? Since one individual would not be able to go to all the nations, this work would require the organized efforts of many. Jesus indicated as much when he invited his disciples to become fishers of men. The type of fishing he referred to here was not that of a lone fisherman using a line and a lure, sitting idly while waiting for the fish to bite. Rather, it involved the use of fishing nets, a labor-intensive activity that at times required the coordinated efforts of many. End quote. Oh, no. You see, according to this reference in the May 2016 Watchtower, of course given to us by the faithful slave, this delightful plate of spiritual food, Jesus told fishermen that refused to use fishing poles in favor of fishing nets. It had nothing to do with fishing at the time, by the way. He was, quote, alluding to. Remember? Jesus alluded to things. He was alluding to, he chose those net throwers because it would work perfectly to describe people riding around in minivans, knocking on doors in random neighborhoods, and sliding magazines under doormats. That's what it means to go to all the nations, according to Jehovah's Witnesses. It takes an organized effort, not a fishing pole, but a fishing net. You see, that all adds up to what this article describes as, quote, labor-intensive activity that requires coordinated efforts, end quote. They didn't just want to eat fish or feed their families in the Bible. That's not what it was about. You see, according to the governing body, they were prophetically pointing to the future people that would hand out magazines for a publishing company in New York. It's moments like these that make me grapple with secondhand embarrassment because I used to believe this type of reasoning. Thankfully, I did not conduct this article in the Watchtower. I was gone already. And how about the irony in this article that said, quote, the type of fishing he referred to here was not that of a lone fisherman using a line and a lure sitting idly while waiting for the fish to bite, end quote. Do you mean like standing in front of a book cart idly as fish rapidly swim by with no interest in taking a nibble of your bait, books or magazines? You can't make up this type of ignorance and lack of self-awareness. If you doubt how important preaching is to Jehovah's Witnesses, look no further than confirmation that invisible spirits are taking them by the hand and leading them to people that want to be Jehovah's Witnesses. If you haven't heard this before, allow me to share. From the Watchtower of 2017, the public edition, number 5, page 8, Jehovah's Witnesses were told, quote, there is no evidence that God is now using angels to help people miraculously in the ways described in the Bible. However, regarding our time, Jesus said, this good news of the kingdom will be preached in all the inhabited earth for a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. Did you know that Christ's disciples are doing his work under the supervision of the angels? End quote. And it's here that we get an explanation as to why natural disasters, looking at you, Southern California, as the time of this recording and these horrific fires, why natural disasters and child safety are completely ignored by Jehovah, Jesus, and the angels on earth because, well, the angels are busy, according to the governing body. They're out in field service. That's right. And by the way, for those who might have a few firing brain cells, they claim that they can't prove angels help people miraculously, but they then claim that they can prove that they're helping Jehovah's Witnesses in field service, all within 2 sentences of a watchtower. Can't prove they're saving kids, can prove they're invisibly hovering over book carts. Same paragraph, folks. Same paragraph. The wisdom of the faithful slave when it comes to preaching and its importance is on full display, not by apostates, but in the Watchtower Library for anyone and everyone that wants to peek. There it is. Preaching. It used to be everything to Jehovah's Witnesses. By the way, I want to add here just a little personal experience. I hated it. I know I've said it before. Couldn't stand it. Biggest struggle as a witness. And I was an elder. I'll let you figure that out. But preaching was everything. That was before their cool website. It was before JW Broadcasting. It was before tablets. And it was before stationary book carts. And nowhere was the message to devote your entire life to handing out their literature and converting people, scratch that, saving lives, more emphasized than with all things pioneering. Pioneering was the pinnacle of what a Jehovah's Witness should do. You may have a title as a man, but pioneering really showed how much you love the organization, and it certainly, as they tell us, is the top privilege for any female Jehovah's Witness. Pioneering. It was never enough to just preach door to door. The emphasis was, and I guess it still is, always on giving up everything you love and your time to commit to a full-time career as a free labor publication distributor, otherwise known as a pioneer. Pioneering was one of many weird words that lived in the minds of all Jehovah's Witnesses, and to my knowledge, I think it still does. I think it still does. It's still a big deal. And no, you won't find that word or that term anywhere in the Bible. No, you won't find Jesus Christ mentioning pioneers, special pioneers, or even missionaries. But just take the governing body's word for it. Jesus told them so. That's part of the reason he chose fishermen, after all. This bizarrely named privilege came to them by means of Holy Spirit way back in the beginning. Right around the time Chuck Russell said the world would end. No big deal, but then it didn't, because Jesus changed it and stuff and delayed showing up as king until he got all invisible and showed up in 1914. But trust them. It happened. They told us so. They've built an entire religion on it. And millions of wonderful people have wasted their entire lives promoting it. Nowhere is that more true than with pioneers who give up everything to be out in field service every day, all the time. I'm hoping there's some pioneers listening that will share with us how pioneering impacted them emotionally and physically, certainly financially. But you might be wondering, where did this all happen? How did this happen? Where did it begin? I'm going to do my best very briefly, there's much more to tell, to summarize the history of pioneering with Jehovah's Witnesses, full-time service, as it's sometimes called. Would you be surprised to learn that most Jehovah's Witnesses have no clue where pioneering started or how it began or what it was called or anything having to do with the history of it? And that includes people who are pioneers today. They don't know where it came from. They can't tell you. They've just signed on. They've had full-time service pounded into their heads since they were kids, if they were born in. They sign up, and no one, that might be a little dramatic, very, very few look at its history or consider the details. Once you go back to the very beginning of the pioneer arrangement and look at its evolution, some painful facts become very apparent, and it's not good. So I'm going to start again very briefly at the beginning. They have gone to great lengths to make full-time pioneering look like a shiny privilege. Even the name itself has changed. But make no mistake, for emphasis, this is a massive privilege inside of Jehovah's Witnesses. You're very special if you pioneer. The name wasn't always pioneering. Today's Jehovah's Witness pioneers started out by being called colporteurs. Are you familiar with the term? I'm going to venture a guess most Jehovah's Witness pioneers don't even know that because, well, if they did, they might have a few questions. Colporteurs. You see, colporteurs isn't a common word in 2025. You're not going to hear it at the gym or at the grocery store. So you might be interested in what its definition is, and I will tell you, hold on tight, because the definition says a lot about Jehovah's Witnesses, the organization, and pioneering. Colporteurs is defined by the Oxford Language Dictionary as, quote, a peddler of books, newspapers, and similar literature. Someone employed by a religious society to distribute Bibles and other religious tracts, end quote. And with that, since a colporteur, or the word colporteur, it's a French word, by the way, for peddler. It's a French word for peddler. Sound nice? What exactly is a peddler, you ask? According to vocabulary.com, a peddler is defined as this, quote, oh boy, a peddler is someone who sells things, but it's a very specific type of selling. Peddlers, also known as hawkers and pitchmen, travel from town to town, especially with a carnival or circus. Peddlers are also found on the street, selling many different things from jewelry to DVDs. There's a shady implication to this word, since peddlers have included people selling snake oil, and other worthless products. Instead of buying from a peddler, you're probably better off at a store. End quote. Peddler, colporteurs, Jehovah's Witnesses. Does any of that sound familiar? I have to tell you, by definition, where they started at the beginning, they were peddlers or colporteurs, known as people that are, quote, shady, selling snake oil and other worthless products. It doesn't seem very good, especially when you are representing Jesus Christ of the Gospels. But nonetheless, the leadership of Jehovah's Witnesses gave these privileged preachers the name peddlers. Sorry about that. Colporteurs. It sounds a little nicer. And they made these hawkers and pitchmen sound very, very romantic inside the organization. And I can't imagine why this name was eventually changed. Can you? I can't figure it out. Oh, well, would you look at that? Let's let the governing body and faithful slave tell us for themselves. From the Awake of December 8th, 2001, page 27, Colporteurs, the walking bookstores is the article. Jehovah's Witnesses are told this about the former pioneers, now pioneers. Quote, the work of educating the public about the Bible was far from finished. In 1881, the magazine Zion's Watchtower and Herald of Christ's Presence, published in the United States, issued a call for Christians to take up the work of evangelists. Their goal? The spread of truth by getting people to read. By 1885, about 300 evangelists had responded to the call and were in the field. Some traveled far and wide, going to such lands as Barbados, Burma, El Salvador, Finland, Guatemala, and Honduras. By the time World War I broke out, such evangelists had spread Bible knowledge in China, Costa Rica, England, France, Germany, New Zealand, Norway, Poland, Sweden, and Switzerland. Interestingly, in early years, full-time evangelists among these Bible students, now known as Jehovah's Witnesses, were called colporteurs. Later, the term was discontinued, as it did not accurately describe the prime objective of their work, Bible education. Moreover, the term did not represent the not-for-profit nature of their activities. Hence, today, full-time ministers of Jehovah's Witnesses are called pioneers. End quote. There it is. There's the history of how they went from hawk pitchers, peddlers, colporteurs to pioneers, because it didn't reflect their stuff very well. They're a not-for-profit organization. See their brand new multi-million-dollar movie studio they're building in Ramapo, New York. No profits are had. And so it began. Way back in 1881. People then associated with Jehovah's Witnesses gave up their lives to become what they call Bible educators in the same paragraph where they admit they were handing out Bibles. They weren't handing out Bibles. They admit in that paragraph they're handing out Zion's Watchtower, published in the United States, their magazine. Without television, the internet, and more, the most effective way to distribute your literature then was to get people to believe God wanted them to, that they alone were chosen by Him to hand out magazines and books explaining the book that God wrote, because, well, neither He nor Jesus were very good teachers, and that whole 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17, well, that was just a mistake or a typo or something. That at this point He needed human authors to write better books and magazines to explain His book and then hand them out. Are you following? Time doesn't permit me to cover all the changes from 1881 to 2025, but needless to say, the leadership of Jehovah's Witnesses claim it was Jesus Christ Himself that instituted and evolved the pioneering arrangement. From colporteurs to pioneers, including the hour requirements that Jesus incidentally forgot to mention in the Bible. It slipped His mind, folks, okay? Jesus had a lot going on. It slipped His mind, but they were all mentioned later on by Jesus when He told the guys in New York to tell the rest of us. If you're a Jehovah's Witness listening and you think, geez, this podcast guy is ridiculous, he is sarcastic, he's stupid, well, that's partly true. I want to say I am ridiculous. But folks, this is not sarcasm. This was stated by the faithful and discreet slave class to all Jehovah's Witnesses in print. You can read it today. Skipping ahead on the timeline for pioneering in the last days during the 20th century, I know it was supposed to end then, but then, things overlapped. If you go in the timeline on all things pioneering, let's skip ahead to what Jehovah's Witness leadership had to say. And this is what they said. In the July 1st, 1943 Watchtower, page 203, Jesus provided all the details for the then faithful and discreet slave when He said this, and might I encourage you to sit back and really take this in. Give this some deeper thought on all things pioneering. Jesus and the organization told Jehovah's Witnesses this, July 1, 43 Watchtower, quote, "Every organization requires specific instructions for all those who serve in it. In the past, the Lord issued His organization instructions to His servants through His central agency or channel." End quote. For a moment, if your brain is saying, okay, Jesus gave His instructions to His servants, His central, how did He do that? Can you show us how that happens? No. Trust me, bro, it just did, okay? Back to the 43 Watchtower. quote, each one joyfully accepted his part therein and faithfully carried it out. Now the apostle says, Jehovah speaks to us through his Son. The Son has returned as King. He has come to his temple. He has appointed his faithful and wise servant, who is his visible mouthpiece, and says to those who are privileged to represent him upon the earth, this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations. End quote. There it is. Whether it's pioneering, field service, auxiliary pioneer, or anything, this came from Jesus, folks. He gave it to them, the faithful and discreet slave who is his visible mouthpiece. The leaders of Jehovah's Witnesses are Jesus' visible mouthpiece. Got it. And now for Jesus' instruction for pioneers. Now that we've established that this comes from Jesus, what does Jesus have to say about the pioneering arrangement? Any Jehovah's Witness pioneer that might be listening might just be shocked at what Jesus originally required of pioneers. He was very reasonable, I might add. Here is what he told them to tell us. Quote, same July 1st, 1943 Watchtower. These expressions of God's will by his king and through his established agency constitute his law or rule of action for the faithful and wise servant and for their good-will companions today who will dwell upon the earth forever in the new world. The Lord breaks down our organization instructions further and makes them more practicable, weird word, but I think it's supposed to be practical. Is this practical? I'm going to let you judge as I continue, by further instructing us through his faithful and wise servant. He says, let us assign the field, the world, to special pioneers, regular pioneers, and companies of Jehovah's Witnesses in an orderly way, sufficient for everyone to thoroughly witness therein, and let us place upon each one the responsibility of caring for the new world interests in their respective assignments. End quote for a moment. Folks, here it is. This is in print, where the governing body of their time, the name itself didn't come around until 1971, but the faithful and discreet slave of that time says they are getting this information directly from Jesus. It says that the Lord breaks down our organization instructions further and makes them more practical by further instructing us. He did? How? Nobody knows. Nobody knows if he appeared and, Thomas showed up and stuck his finger in his side. We don't know. We just have to take their word for it. You're a Jehovah's Witness in 1943, and pioneering is needed. We got to get books and magazines out there. These are instructions, according to them, directly from Jesus. The Watchtower of 43 continues, quote, he says, the requirements for special pioneers shall be 175 hours and 50 back calls per month, which should develop into a reasonable number of studies. And for regular pioneers, 150 hours and as many back calls and studies as can be properly developed during that time. And for company publishers, that's right, the word company publishers, he says, let us make a quota of 60 hours and 12 back calls and at least one study a week for each publisher. These directions come to us from the Lord through his established agency directing what is required of us. And for those who really love the Lord and are guided by his counsel, that is a reasonable service requirement. This expression of the Lord's will should be the end of all controversy. It is for good that these requirements are made, for thereby you are enabled to prove your integrity and magnify the Lord's name. End quote. And with that, we have what might be one of the earliest gaslighting sessions in the history of Jehovah's Witnesses. Have you ever seen anything like this? Again, for those who need to read this and want to, I encourage it. July 1st, 1943 Watchtower, page 203, where they claim Jesus told them these were the requirements. And by the way, if you really love him, you're going to do it. And wow. You thought pioneering in the 90-hour requirement was tough in the 80s and 90s. But just in case you missed how serious Jesus was in setting up the pioneer arrangement, he didn't stop with our requirements or the return visits. 175, 150, get with it if you really love me. After all, if you weren't making your hours, did you really love Jesus at all? This is from him. And now, for those pioneers or just common sense people that wanted to complain about what Jesus wanted them to do. The same 1943 Watchtower, page 203, quote, "The Lord, through his faithful and wise servant, now say to us, let us cover our territory 4 times in 6 months." That becomes our organization instructions and has the same binding force on us that his statement to the Logos had when he said, "Let us make man in our image." It is our duty to accept this additional instruction and obey it. But someone will say, the conditions are different. In the ease of the Logos, he could accomplish what Jehovah commanded him to do. But when it comes to covering our territory 4 times in 6 months, that is out of all reason. We have never covered it more than once, or at the most, twice in 6 months. It just can't be done. We have all heard that argument before. And if it were true, it would look bad indeed, and would imply that the Lord was asking us to do something that is impossible for us to accomplish. The children of Israel walked around Jericho 7 times the last day. The territory now being covered 1 to 2 times in 6 months could very easily be covered 4 to 6 times in the same period if everyone took his kingdom responsibilities seriously. This is not theory, but actual facts based on figures gleaned from a number of companies during the past 6 months. End quote. Do you feel the inspiration and the Holy Spirit? No bitching and complaining is allowed. We're going to address that right out of the chute here. You are to cover your territory 4 times in 6 months. You are to spend 175 hours a month doing it. This is a command from Jesus. He told us so. And it's just as binding, they might add, as when Jehovah turned to Jesus and said, "Let's make man in our image." It holds the same weight. And nothing says Holy Spirit by Jesus basing this command on data he pulled, as he tells us, from companies the past 6 months. Companies? What? Was there a consultant involved with Jesus when he called this out? I had always thought this was a spiritual paradise, a temple. Why are we pulling data from private sector companies or businesses when making decisions about saving lives? No one knows. Again, just take their word for it. Who knew Jesus built his kingdom on information provided by other companies? Who knew that pioneering was as serious as when Jehovah elbowed Jesus and said, hey, let's make this guy Adam in our image, and then we'll pull a rib out and make a woman for him. Who knew? But there it is, in print. And if you all get your act together and really, really care about the kingdom, you can cover that territory 4 times in 6 months. Got to have the right attitude. And maybe my favorite of all, he still made those Israelites march around Jericho 7 times, whether they liked it or not. So get your ass out in the pioneer work. Oh my. This might be one of my favorite sections of this organization. And if you're a pioneer listening or someone who has spent a great deal of their life pioneering, how does this feel? This was the beginning of that arrangement. And we're told it came directly from Jesus. And it's at this point that I've got to add, this command to pioneers, whether it's the hours or the backcalls or covering a territory 4 times in 6 months. And if you really care, you'll do it. And it's just like when Jehovah said, Jesus, let's make a guy. If you take all the weight of where this decision came from, I want you to remember something, and I'm struggling with it. Somebody help me out here. This command that I just read to you from the 1943 Watchtower on Pioneering comes to us directly from the same guy that said this. Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 and 29 of the New World Translation, where we get Jesus speaking to us directly in his book. And he says, quote, "Come to me, all you who are toiling and loaded down, and I will refresh you. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am mild-tempered and lowly in heart, and you will find refreshment for yourselves. For my yoke is kindly and my load is light." End quote. Well, apparently Jesus thought covering your territory 4 times in 6 months, devoting 150 to 175 hours with 50 return visits, was by definition refreshing and a light load for the people he chose as pioneers. His yoke is kindly, his load is light after all. That's not too much to ask. And by the way, as addressed by the faithful slave in this watchtower, the same guy that said this stuff, he told them to tell him, if you complain about it, you don't love me enough. How about you try skipping your coffee break at Starbucks and walking around the block 7 times like the Israelites did at Jericho? Not sure how it relates, but I'm sure it does somehow. Somebody wrote this under inspiration, right? You see, pioneering and full-time service to the Watchtower Society was a direct command from Jesus Christ, and we should all thank them for the reminder and the instructions. And guess what? Jesus was watching after he made those pioneering demands. In the now mothballed 1944 Yearbook of Jehovah's Witnesses, his mouthpiece here on earth wasn't very happy with the pioneers. Uh-oh. Now we've got problems. The faithful and discreet slave did not like what they were seeing from the pioneers. The 1944 yearbook tells us this, quote, "It is to be observed that the general pioneer publishers put in only 111.8 hours per month on the average, whereas the requirement is 150 hours. There are quite a number of pioneers on the list who are not able to meet the required number of hours because of old age and sickness, and thus the average of hours is down. Some of these brethren have been pioneers for many, many years, and because of their faithful and continued service, will not be removed from the list." End quote for a moment. Wow, how kind of them. They were only able in sickness and old age to devote 111 hours on average. I guess we'll let you still be a pioneer. And for those that think these numbers are arbitrary and they're man-made, I just want to remind you that the same guys you obey today, you might let a kid die from a lack of blood, or you might let some other awful thing happen. How about shunning? Are the same guys that said they got all of this from Jesus. These are Jesus number requirements for pioneers. He also changed the name from peddlers and colporteurs to pioneers. Just want to remind you, back to the 1944 yearbook, it continues, quote, "It is hoped that during the coming year, the general average of these pioneers will be increased. However, because there are many who can put in more hours than they plan in their daily routine. Analyzing it briefly, 150 hours a month amounts to only 5 hours of field service a day. This is not much when one considers what the devil's organization requires of an individual. There, one has to get to and from his place of work on his own time. But the Lord's organization allows one some time for even that." How generous. Quote, "A person who works consistently 6 days a week and puts in about 5 hours witnessing, actually going from door to door proclaiming the message, and 1 or 2 hours on back calls and book studies daily, will find it easy to get in all this time in a month." End quote. 1944 yearbook. You can't make this up. If you're a former pioneer, did you know any of this? Even if you weren't, did you know any of this? If you're going to complain, consider what the other team is doing. Team Satan. They don't get to count their time when they're driving to their job or home from their job, but Jesus will let you count your time on the way to the ministry, after work, when you're going to put in 5 hours after a 40-hour week each day. Get your act together. You can do this with the, extra 5 hours you have every day. Doesn't everybody have an extra 5 hours a day? Even if you're working full time, as they tell us here. You're working 6 days a week, it says. Well, if you're reasonable and you love the Lord, you can give us 5 more hours a day, have to be out knocking on doors, and 1 to 2 more hours on top of that for return visits and Bible studies. That's only 15 hours a day between your job and doing this for Jesus. Isn't it nice that he'll let you get some sleep? This is in print. This is in print. Of course, he pulled this all from company data. That's a direct quote. Jesus went to heaven and he completely redefined what he meant by a light load, didn't he? Completely redefined it. Who doesn't have an extra 5 hours every day? When you read this, it puts an entirely new spin on how we all have viewed pioneering as a Jehovah's Witness, because this is where it came from. It is nothing more than a full-time job for a publishing company, a cult building an empire on the backs of free labor. And the worst part about all of this is people did it. People do it. Thinking Jesus gave them these instructions, these fabricated, man-made hour requirements. People did it. Inexplicably, over the decades, Jesus changed all of this as time went on, and he sent the message to his visible mouthpiece on earth. Jehovah's Witness pioneers no longer put in 150 to 175 hours. In fact, the hour requirements were reduced just 5 years later in 1949 down to a paltry, wow, this was sure giving of them, down to a paltry 120 hours. No word yet on why Jesus made that decision. He went from 175 to 150 down to 120. We don't know why Jesus changed his mind or why he changes it as often as he does, especially when you consider that he's actually requiring less hours, and each passing second brings us closer to Him. And of course, former members of this visible mouthpiece killing all the rest of us that didn't do this or believe in it. Isn't it even more important to pioneer and save lives today than it was in 1943? Why has He eased up on the requirements for pioneers as the end gets closer? No one knows. Well, we do. That truly is me being ridiculous and sarcastic. We do know. Much like everything inside Jehovah's Witnesses, you just have to trust the governing body. You have to ignore the Bible itself. Things like Psalms 146:3 about trusting men, and then you just have to turn around and trust these men. That's the way it works. This all came from Jesus, the pioneering arrangement. And I feel like I really have to emphasize the fact and remind anyone listening that this is all done for free. They have called this arrangement a volunteer work. Naturally, most reasonable people want to know how anyone can possibly afford to do this and support themselves financially. It's a very good question. It's a reasonable question. You have to work, you have to support yourself, and you have to pioneer for them. I can't go into, time does not allow me to tell you the stress and misery this put on people. But wouldn't you know it? You're somebody who wants to pioneer because you believe Jesus wants you to. These guys told you He said it, and here's His requirements. They change, try to keep up. But I'm trying to figure out how to support myself financially and do this work. Jesus didn't give a lot of instructions when He said His load was light. He sure didn't. But wouldn't you know it? The guys in New York have answers. From the Watchtower of November 1st, 1992, paragraph 8, it encourages Jehovah's Witnesses to just figure it out. Figure it out. They tell us there, quote, Christians should be able to support themselves, even if they are full-time pioneer ministers. If married, a man should be able to provide properly for his wife and any children that may be born, with a little extra to give to those in need and to support the local and worldwide preaching work, end quote. Aside from the irony that the men who told us this don't do any of those things, how about the pressure? This leads to more problems than I have time to discuss, but it doesn't take much to figure out. This causes everything from economic hardships to divorces. It is a real life nightmare. And I'm speaking from my own experience as an elder. Living just above poverty, often with government assistance, the same governments that same pioneer who's getting assistance from the government, he's going to go out and tell everyone are run by Satan and they're going to be destroyed soon anyway, but I'm going to depend on them to, eat. Broken automobiles. No clothes, no way to put new clothes on their back or get a new jacket. On and on it goes. You're just supposed to figure it out. That's what a pioneer does. And I am sure there's at least one person listening who was pioneered and can share how difficult it was to do this. But if you're in doubt, a Jehovah's Witness is told to just buck up and just have more faith. Have more faith. I'm sorry you're eating green beans out of a can. I'm sorry your car's broken down. Make sure you get your pioneer hours. Have more faith, brother or sister. From the Kingdom Ministry of July 1998, pages 3 and 4, paragraph 5, they even give a guarantee to pioneers. It says, quote, anyone entering pioneer service should do so with full confidence that Jehovah will provide for him. He is doing just that for faithful pioneers everywhere. Of course, in harmony with the principles in 2 Thessalonians 3, 8 through 10 and 1 Timothy 5, 8, pioneers do not expect others to support them financially. End quote. This is in print. Jehovah's going to pay your bills. Don't rely on other people. Jehovah will take care of that. He'll buy you a car. He'll make sure you're eating and have health insurance. Keep handing out our literature for X amount of hours a month. And really, in all honesty, I laugh at this because it is so absurd. It is so painfully obvious what is happening here. But folks, I feel compelled to say this. This is really, really sick. It is really sick stuff. This organization and the leadership has successfully manipulated really good, kind-hearted people searching for a purpose in life to become colporteurs, peddlers, pioneers. Please don't follow any of this advice. Someone who's pioneered or is thinking about pioneering will soon learn that Jehovah gets real distracted and he just seems to miss out and not show up with a paycheck to bail you out. He doesn't pay your electric bill for you. Your car's got a flat tire. He doesn't show up with a jack. He's not AAA. And I can speak from experience in telling you that the history of Jehovah's Witnesses is filled with really sick, tragic stories involving amazing people who were pioneers. They thought they were doing what Jesus wanted them to do. Really good people who got burned. But as we progress through this organization's timeline, you will find that the governing body has changed the hour requirements significantly, even from the time when I was a Jehovah's Witness. These hours are arbitrary and fabricated by men. Sorry, I know they claim it's from Jesus, but no one's been able to show us how that happens. As an example, in 1999, pioneers, I was actually an elder then, pioneers were told this in the 2000 yearbook of Jehovah's Witnesses, page 18, quote, "Because of the increased pressure being felt by people everywhere in providing adequately for their physical needs, in January 1999, Jesus Christ the Lord..." Oh, wait, no, I'm sorry. Back to the quote. In January 1999, the governing body made an adjustment in the hour requirement for regular pioneers, reducing it from 90 to 70 hours per month, and for auxiliary pioneers from 60 to 50. What a blessing that has proved to be. It has enabled many who were already pioneering to stay on the list. Jesus has lists, folks, and thousands more have enrolled. To many, it was further evidence that the Lord is kind. End quote. If you're really paying attention to this, they out themselves. The governing body made the adjustment in print, and then they compare that to Jesus. They attribute that to Jesus because he's kind, thereby melding them with Jesus Christ as if they're the same. Folks, there's no way around this. And for those who volunteer to hand out their literature or stand in front of a cart, this is sick. It's sick. Did Jehovah and his son just start being kind in 1999 when this was told to them? Did they just decide to be kind? I got him saying in Matthew 28, his load is light, to come to him, he'll refresh them. But apparently he just decided to be even more kind in January 1999. Were they less kind to those pioneers in 1943, by the way, who were required to work full-time and commit to 5 hours a day, 6 days a week, to reach the 150-hour requirement? Don't forget the required 50 return visits. No one hears about those anymore. Jesus has become more kind. Why did they hold back in showing kindness by reducing the hours decades ago? Isn't that a sin, by the way? Nah, let's not think here. Unfortunately, Jehovah's Witnesses give little to no thought to any of this as they're being used by a publishing company. It's all very, very obvious. Pioneering, for all that it gave people and all that it helped people feel in that organization, was invented by a publishing company. They use the word company themselves in the Watchtower. They use words like lists, enrolling, and it's been passed off as coming from heaven itself. Can't you just picture it? According to the Watchtower quote from earlier, hey, let's make a man in our image. At some point, Jehovah nudged Jesus and said, hey, let's come up with this colporteur thing. Let's come up with pioneers. Let's keep the ball moving. We'll change the hours on them every decade. They've been able to get millions of people, good people, who really wanted to help others, to waste their lives. Give them free labor. And folks, it's still going on in 2025. This is still happening. It's so heartbreaking. Apparently, Jehovah once again decided to be kind. Jesus joined in. Let's be kind. Even though, as you see, Jehovah and Jesus aren't even mentioned in this announcement. But guess who is? In the August 2020 announcements and reminders, Jehovah's Witnesses, the fourth bullet point was titled, Our Requirements for Pioneers and Missionaries. See if you can spot the benevolent love and kindness going out to those who are grinding out now 70 hours a month for the Watchtower Society. The announcement reads, quote, the COVID-19 pandemic has significantly affected the ministry of pioneers and field missionaries. The governing body understands the challenges and does not want these faithful servants to feel pressured to meet an hour requirement. Thus, until further notice, regular pioneers, special pioneers, and missionaries are not expected to reach a specific hour requirement. We are confident that all will do their best. We hope this provision allows our hard-working pioneers and missionaries to continue to find joy in their service during this challenging time. End quote. August 2020 announcements. One single paragraph, packed with significant proof that this organization is a cult. Most will miss it. It goes right over their head. They're not paying attention. I want to remind everyone that the Pioneer Service is a volunteer work. So imagine these 11 guys having the balls to give people permission to not meet a fabricated hour requirement during a worldwide pandemic. Did they need Jehovah's permission? Is he just being kind again? Wait a second. If you were paying attention to this announcement, Jehovah and Jesus aren't even mentioned in this announcement. The announcement said the governing body understands the challenges and doesn't want our pioneers to feel pressured. Our? Imagine you were a pioneer during COVID. Most international tragedies are party season for Jehovah's Witnesses because they can then point to it and say, look, we're in the last days. Look at this terrible thing. People are dying from COVID. And they have all the answers when they come to your door. But nothing gives a pioneer a shot in the arm like the governing body speaking in this announcement, giving them a vote of confidence. Why do we need what they think? By saying, quote, we are sure you will do your best. Keep that joy. In addition, the not so subtle message is to keep going out in service during a pandemic. Not an announcement from Jesus, but as they tell us, from the governing body, And by the way, you're our pioneers. It's subjects like this that lead to frustration because those of us that have broken free from their grasp can't understand when we read this how Jehovah's Witnesses don't see this. It's right there in a paragraph. Healing is fantastic, but we also need to remember how brainwashed these people are, how brainwashed we were if you're out now. Right there in the paragraph, they admit what they are. But it gets better. In Governing Body Update number 1 in 2023, one of your favorite king priests, Mark Sanderson, got in front of the camera and made yet another profound announcement regarding the pioneers, where he told them, quote, as world conditions continue to deteriorate, the governing body sees that our pioneers are facing similar challenges. End quote for a moment. I'm going to emphasize this, folks, especially for a witness bravely here listening or a pioneer. They said the governing body, not Jesus, and that you're their pioneers. Back to the quote, therefore, we are very pleased to announce that the governing body has decided to adjust the hour requirements for pioneers, effective March 1st, 2023. You may want to get a pen or something to write this down. Are you ready? Here are the new requirements. For new pioneers, the new requirement will be 600 hours per year. That is an average of 50 hours per month. For auxiliary pioneers, the requirement will now be 30 hours. But notice this is very exciting. During March and April and during the month of the Circuit Overseer's visit, publishers can choose to pioneer with the reduced hour requirement of 15 hours. This should make it possible for many more of us to auxiliary pioneer during those months of special activity. We look to Jehovah to bless all of these arrangements to his glory and praise. End quote. Wait a minute, I thought this was Jehovah's arrangement. What? I started by showing you in print that they claim in the 1943 Watchtower that this all comes from Jesus directly. Jesus isn't even mentioned anymore. Is it just a slip of the tongue every time they say the governing body has decided? Do they really mean Jesus? Is he still whispering in their ears? So now Jehovah's Witnesses are to believe that Armageddon hangs over everyone's head and Jesus has decided to make up new arbitrary hour requirements that means spending less time saving people's lives as Armageddon approaches. This is great news. It's very exciting, according to Mark Sanderson. The wisdom and the obvious Holy Spirit of the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. From arbitrary hour requirements you can't find anywhere in the Bible, and even arbitrary titles like pioneer and auxiliary pioneer, also not found in the Bible, Jesus is now making it easier than ever to be a pioneer. Incidentally, and maybe a side point only someone as demented as me can contemplate, I'm guessing this is why Peter got his own 2 books in the Bible. Could it be? You see, the Apostle Peter was hitting his pioneer hours versus his brother, the Apostle Andrew. He didn't even get a book in the Bible, and now I know why. He probably missed his pioneer hours, or maybe he was just an auxiliary pioneer when Jesus appointed him. There it is. The governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, they never cease to entertain. But in reality, it's all just an insult. It's painfully insulting. While this is clearly a man-made pyramid scam to peddle their literature, it's also left a wake of human tragedy that goes back decades. If today you want a project, access the Watchtower Library and look under the heading Pioneers Examples. It's right there. And prepare to throw up. You will see a long list of real people with real stories, allegedly, who have pioneered for this company. Sorry, organization. I wish I had more time to relate some of the worst examples that they put in print, but they're there for you. Here are a few of the people's stories you will find under pioneers and examples in the library. Near to giving birth, muscular dystrophy, epileptic, declines $1 million offer, quadriplegic, polio, on crutches or in a wheelchair, widow who survived an air crash, rundown trailer, no money, spina bifida, brittle bone disease, husband comatose. Folks, I just read those from the library. I haven't even dented the listings under Pioneer, with the point of all of this being that these poor people, sick, tragic, terrible situations in life, gave the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses pioneer hours during all that they were enduring. When a Jehovah's Witness asks if the governing body has any shame, the answer is a resounding no. Allow me to add, hell no. These guys got in a room, made arbitrary decisions and requirements, claimed they got them from Jesus, and went about their lives as these people clamored to meet their fabricated hour requirement while in the grips of disease, financial distress, can't walk, and a whole bunch more. All to hand out their literature. And so there is no way around it. These guys are sick. And when I say sick, I mean deeply, deeply sick in the head. They've been helping good people waste their lives for over a century. Jehovah's Witnesses have always pointed to their preaching work as proof that they are God's only organization. Even as other religions do the exact same thing, there are many. So they doubled down. Pioneering is field service on steroids. Pioneers and what they give to them allow them to share grand field service statistics every year. It's a lot like padding your sales numbers. It has truly never been anything but that. Nonetheless, Jehovah's Witnesses grow up believing it's more important to pioneer than almost anything else they can do. As you can see from the library references, their own personal health, safety, happiness, finances. And to land this point home and trying not to get angry at the end, I want to read just one example found there in the library of how deep this brainwashing runs in the wonderful people trapped in this religion who just want to help other people. Are you ready? From the Watchtower of January 15th, 2011, paragraph 13, we are told this, quote, "Consider the example of Stephanie, a 19-year-old regular pioneer. At age 12, she suffered a stroke and was diagnosed with a brain tumor. Since then, she has undergone surgery twice, received radiation treatment, and suffered 2 more strokes, which left her with limited movement on her left side and limited vision." Folks, hold on. Seriously, hold on tight to your seat. Back to the article quote, "Stephanie has to save her energy for the things that she considers more important, such as Christian meetings and field service." End quote. You have a brain tumor? You've suffered multiple strokes? You've been through 2 surgeries, radiation? You're 19 years old? Make sure, according to the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, that you, dear Stephanie, have and save whatever energy for the more important things. Getting fabricated hour requirements out front of their book cart. And oh, please, if you feel like throwing up from the radiation treatment, or you feel weak and dizzy from the lasting effects of strokes or a brain tumor, like you might fall down, can you really please make sure not to fall down on the book cart? Don't knock the books over. Can someone help me find the words? This is in print from 2011. And they have the balls to print this as an example of what other Jehovah's Witnesses should do and give up to be a regular pioneer. These men and this organization are sick. And God, I hope Stephanie's okay, wherever she is. And so, such is a brief history of pioneering. There is much to say, but I hope I captured the insanity and the tragedy of these kind-hearted people who just want to volunteer to help others. And if you are a Jehovah's Witness or a pioneer here listening, thank you for being here. Please consider what you heard here. Please go look up the references. Please consider discontinuing your participation in this nonsense. If you still believe in God, remember, it was the Apostle John who told the rest of us that Jehovah draws people to him anyway at John 6:44. Jehovah will make sure they get the message if you still believe in him. And in John 6:44, there's no mention of an hour requirement. Nowhere. Otherwise, as I close, how about a different person's perspective? The great artist Michelangelo once said, quote, "There is no greater harm than that of time wasted." End quote. Thanks for joining me this week. Wherever you may be well.